Welcome, boys and girls, to Storytime. Today, we are going to begin a new book, and it is going to take us 8 weeks to finish this book because it has 8 chapters. Now, this is Dangerous Journey. It is the story of a man named Christian on his journey. It is actually a picture book of the Pilgrim's Progress. Now, Pilgrim's Progress was written by John Bunyan, and it was a book that most Christians had back in its day. It is a wonderful allegory about Christian and his journey to the kingdom. So, we will begin with chapter 1. The Slough of Despond. What is a slough? We don't use that word much. Well, it is like a mucky, miry pond, a marsh, something where your foot could get stuck in and it could pull you in like a bog. So, the Slough of Despond. As I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place and laid me down to sleep. And as I slept, I dreamed a dream. So we are going to find out the dream. I dreamed that I saw a man with his face turned away from his own house, a book in his hand, and a great burden on his back. I looked and saw him open the book and read therein. And as he read, he wept and trembled, and not being able to contain himself, he broke out with a lamentable cry, saying, "What shall I do to be saved?" Do you see, Christian? Do you see him looking away from his household? He's really not paying attention to them. He's engrossed with the book on his lap, and he has a giant burden on his back. For he lived in the city of destruction, which he learnt from his book was doomed to be burned with fire from heaven, in which fearful overthrow both himself and his wife and their 4 sons would miserably perish, unless some way of escape could be found. So Christian, for that was his name, went home to talk to his family. And they were greatly worried, not because they believed that what he said was true, but because they thought some kind of madness had got into the poor man. And as it was drawing towards night, they hoped that sleep might settle his brains. With all haste, they put him to bed. They thought he was crazy. But the night was as troublesome to him as the day. Wheretofore, instead of sleeping, he spent it in sighs and tears. So when morning was come, and they asked him how he was, he told them, "Worse, worse." He also started talking to them again, but they began to lose patience. Sometimes they would deride him, sometimes they would chide him, and sometimes they would quite neglect him. So Christian went by himself into the fields, still reading his book and carrying his burden, and greatly distressed in his mind. He looked this way and that way, as if he would run. Yet he stood still, because he couldn't tell which way to go. Then, in the distance, he saw a man approaching. His name was Evangelist, and he asked Christian, "Do you know what an evangelist is?" An evangelist is someone that preaches the gospel, the good news, the message of salvation. But you see, Christian doesn't know which way to go. So Evangelist says, "What are you weeping for?" "Sir," he answered, "this book in my hand tells me to flee from the wrath to come. Also, I fear that this burden which is upon my back will sink me lower than the grave. Therefore, I need to get rid of it." "If this is so," said Evangelist, "then why are you standing still?" "Because I don't know where to go," he answered. Then Evangelist pointed with his finger over a wide field. "Do you see yonder wicket gate?" he asked. "No," said Christian. "Then do you see a shining light?" I think I do," said Christian. "Then," said Evangelist, "keep that light in your eye and go in that direction. So shall you reach the gate. There, when you knock, it will be told to you what to do." So I saw in my dream that the man began to run. But he hadn't run far before his wife and children saw him running and called after him to return. But the man put his fingers in his ears and ran on. He didn't look back, but ran towards the middle of the plain. The neighbors too came out to see him run, and as he ran, some mocked and others threatened. A couple of them were resolved to fetch him back by force. The name of the one was Obstinate, and the name of the other was Pliable. Now by this time the man had gone a good distance from them. Nevertheless, they pursued him and overtook him. So he's being chased by Pliable and Obstinate. I wonder who is who. Maybe Obstinate and Pliable? And there is Christian with his book and the burden on his back. "Neighbors, why have you come?" asked Christian. "To persuade you to come back with us," they said. "That can by no means be," said Christian. "You dwell in the city of destruction. Be content, good neighbors, to go along with me." "What?" said Obstinate, "and leave our friends and comforts behind us?" "Yes, for I seek an endless kingdom, which we may inhabit forever. Read of it, if you will, in my book." "Tch!" cried Obstinate. "Away with your book. Will you go back with us or no?" "No, I will not." Pliable so far had held his peace, but now he spoke. "If what Christian says is true, I intend to go with this good man." "Very well, then," replied Obstinate. "I will go back to my own place. I'll be no companion to such fantastical fellows." With that, they parted. Obstinate went back, and Christian and Pliable went on over the plain, discoursing all the while. "Tell me more, neighbor Christian," inquired Pliable, "about the place to which we're going. There are crowns of glory to be given us, and garments shining like the sun," Christian told him. "That's very pleasant. And what else?" "There shall be no more crying," said Christian, "for the owner of the place will wipe all tears from our eyes." "Well, my good companion, I'm glad to hear these things. Come on, let's hurry." "I can't go any faster," answered Christian, "with this burden on my back." Oh my, what has happened here? Now I saw in my dream that as they were hurrying along and talking, they had drawn near to a quagmire in the middle of the plain, which was called the Slough of Despond. And before they knew what was happening, they had both fallen into the bog. It was a bog where many travelers before them had been drowned. Here, therefore, they wallowed, being grievously bedabbled with the dirt. And Christian, because of the burden on his back, began to sink. First knee-deep, then waist-deep. into the loathsome scum. "Neighbor, Christian, where are you now?" asked Pliable. "Truly I do not know," Christian replied. So Pliable began to be offended and angrily said to his fellow, "Is this the happiness you promised me? If we have such ill speed at our first setting out, what may we expect this in our journey's end?" With that, having no burden to contend with, Pliable scrambled out on the side of the slough, which was nearest to his own house, and so he ran off home for a hot bath, leaving Christian to his fate. For his part, Christian was struggling to reach the side of the slough nearest to the wicket gate, which he eventually did, but couldn't clamber out by reason of the burden on his back. Then I beheld in my dream that a man came to him whose name was Help, and asked him what he was doing there. Christian answered, "Sir, I was bidden to go on this way by a man called Evangelist. But did you not look for the stepping stones?" "Fear followed me so hard that I fell in," Christian replied. "That is the same snare and hazard of this place," said Help. "It so spews out its filth. At the changes of the weather, these steps are hardly seen. Here, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand and drew him out and set him on firm ground again. And Christian continued on his way towards the wicket gate. Although he didn't know it, worse trouble lay in store. Worse trouble than the quagmire, worse trouble than the bog and sinking so deep and almost drowning. For a certain man, Mr. Worldly Wiseman, was now seen crossing the field to meet him. He dwelt in the town of Carnal Policy, a very great town, hard by where Christian lived. This man then, having some inkling of him, for Christian's departure from the city of destruction was so much noised abroad, began to question him. What does that mean? Everybody was talking about Christian and his journey and leaving the city of destruction to go to the wicket gate. "How now, good fellow? Where are you going with that great burden?" "I'm going to yonder wicket gate." "Have you a wife and children?" asked Mr. Worldly Wiseman. "Why, yes," replied Christian, "but I am so heavily weighed down, I can't take pleasure in them any more." "Who counseled you to start upon this dangerous journey?" "A man that came to me. His name, as I remember, was Evangelist." "I thought as much," said Worldly Wiseman. "He is forever leading travelers astray. There's no more difficult road in the world than the one he's directed you to. I see by the dirt on you that you've already been in the Slough of Despond, but that slough is only the beginning of your troubles. In the way you are going, you are likely to encounter far worse things than this. Lions, dragons, darkness, and death. This has been confirmed by many witnesses. So why should a man so carelessly risk his life by giving heed to a stranger?" After pausing for breath, Mr. Worldly Wiseman proceeded as follows. "Hear me. I am older than you, and I'll give you some advice. In yonder village there dwells a gentleman whose name is Legality, a very judicious man, a man of very good name. He has skill to help men off with their burdens. He has, to my knowledge, cured several who were going out of their wits because of them. His house is not a mile from this place, and if he's not at home himself, his son, who's called Civility, will help you. Moreover, if you wish, there are houses standing empty in the village at reasonable rates. The food is cheap and good, and you can send for your wife and family and all live happily ever after. Christian, we fear, was all too ready to listen to Mr. Worldly Wiseman and leave the straight path that he was on. "Sir, which is the way to this honest man's house?" he inquired. "Do you see yonder high hill?" asked Mr. Worldly Wiseman. "Yes, very well." "By that hill you must go, and the first house you come to is Mr. Legality's." Thus did Mr. Worldly Wiseman courteously direct poor Christian down the wrong road. For what he had failed to tell him was the hill ahead was a fearsome mountain. It seemed to overhang the road so much that Christian, looking up as the clouds scudded over it, was afraid that it would fall upon his head. Worse than that, there were flashes of fire coming out of it, and Christian, because of his burden, might easily have fallen and thus early on his journey have been burnt to death. Wherefore he did sweat and quake for fear. At that moment, who should appear but Evangelist? Evangelist is back, coming to meet him with a severe and dreadful countenance, at the sight of which Christian began to blush with shame. "Aren't you the man I found weeping outside the city of destruction?" questioned Evangelist. "Yes, dear sir, I am the man." "Did I not direct you to the little wicket gate?" "Yes, dear sir," replied Christian. "How is it then that you've so quickly turned aside?" "I met, you see, a gentleman, and he persuaded me that I might find in the village before me a man who could take off my burden," he said. "Moreover, he would show me a better way, not so attended with difficulties as the way, sir, that you have set me in." Then said Mr. Evangelist, "Stand still a little." So he stood trembling, and Evangelist said, "You have rejected the word of God for the advice of Mr. Worldly Wiseman. But Mr. Legality cannot free you of your burden. Mr. Legality is a cheat. As for his son's civility, notwithstanding his simpering looks, he cannot help you either." As he spoke, there was a great clap of thunder, and Christian called himself 1,000 fools for listening to Mr. Worldly Wiseman. "I am sorry I have hearkened to this man's counsel," he said, turning back with haste. He spoke to no one on the way, nor, if anybody asked him, would he give them an answer. He went like one that was all the while treading on forbidden ground, and could by no means think himself safe, till he had regained the road he had abandoned. But would he ever reach it? He wasn't at all sure. For narrow is the gate, it says in his book, and few are they who find it. Next week, we will begin chapter 2, The Interpreter's House. He is on the road that few find, and we will see where his journey takes him.